Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. So with 11 days to go until Election Day, we would have loved to begin our show with the state of the race. Who's campaigning where, which races are tightening, and how will these final days of the campaign play out? But that's not our lead story. Instead, we begin with the violent assault at the home of the most powerful member of Congress, who also is second in line to the presidency. Police in San Francisco say a man broke into the San Francisco home of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi this morning and attacked her husband, Paul, with a hammer. Two sources tell NBC News that the suspect was searching the home for the House Speaker, shouting, "Where is Nancy?" before the attack, with a family member telling NBC News he was trying to tie Paul Pelosi up until the House Speaker got home. That suspect, who authorities identified as 42-year-old David DePape, is now in custody. Paul Pelosi was transported to the hospital as a result of the attack. A family member tells us he's undergoing surgery right now after being hit in the head multiple times in the attack. This afternoon, San Francisco's police chief described part of the incident.
Our officers observed Mr. Pelosi and the suspect both holding a hammer. The suspect pulled the hammer away from Mr. Pelosi and violently assaulted him with it. Our officers immediately tackled the suspect, disarmed him, took him into custody, requested emergency backup, and rendered medical aid. The motive for this attack is still being determined.
My colleague Tom Winter has some new reporting on motive that we're going to get to in just a minute, as well as more information on the suspect's background. Speaker Pelosi herself was actually here in Washington, D.C. at the time of the incident with her own protective detail. But a family member says she is now headed to San Francisco to be by her husband's side. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have condemned the assault. And by the way, if you're wondering, Capitol Police protect her. So if she had been home, then they would have been there, but they do not protect her home when she is not there, for what it's worth. The incident comes amid a surge in attacks and threats against members of Congress and other public officials. This is just since the January 6th attack on the Capitol. We've seen several members of Congress go public with death threats and other harrowing incidents. In fact, a Pennsylvania man happened to plead guilty today to making threatening calls to California Congressman Eric Swalwell's office over the summer, where he actually threatened to kill the congressman. Threats against members of Congress are up 144% from 2017 to last year. That's according to the U.S. Capitol Police. So this didn't happen in a vacuum. And if anybody wants to pretend to be shocked that this happened, they've been living in a hole. Joining me now is NBC investigative correspondent Tom Winter. We also have senior reporter Ben Collins and Capitol Hill correspondent Ryan Nobles on this. Also with us is an expert on extremism, Mary McCord, a visiting professor of law at Georgetown University and the executive director of the International Institute of Constitutional Advocacy and Protection. But let's get to more facts about what we know on motive and the suspect. I'm going to start with you, Tom Winter. I understand you have some new reporting on some more details on motive.
Right. So what's going on right now, Chuck, is law enforcement is looking at a host of potential social media posts. And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean Facebook, but more of the blog type variety. That this individual, David DePape, born January 1980, 42 years of age, last known address, Berkeley, California, whether or not he is the actual person behind those blogs and behind those posts, that's something that takes time. So while we may look at him and say, OK, well, it's got the same name and this person has a very unusual name, not found really anywhere else in the United States, and you have these posts, so obviously it must be that person. But from a law enforcement perspective and from our reporting perspective, they need to do some actual investigative work to be able to tie those accounts conclusively to this individual. Now, we do expect charges to be dropped later this afternoon. We're talking about attempted homicide, assault, elderly abuse, and a whole host of other charges, Chuck. So perhaps by the time those charges are publicly filed, right, we'll have a little bit more of some of those details. But that's what they're looking at now. Another thing that we're trying to get some answers on is surveillance video from the House. We've seen a number of pictures of the Pelosi home where there are very clearly surveillance cameras. What do they have? What does it show? Does it show this individual? And then all of the detail that you just reported from our colleague Adam Reese, speaking with a family member traveling with the Pelosi's about what this individual said. It's one thing to say, where is Nancy? I mean, I certainly think it's obvious that he wanted to at a bare minimum, talk to the Speaker of the House, if not do something violent to her. But now we understand that there's this idea that he wanted to tie up Paul Pelosi until the Speaker got home. So clearly this individual had some some violent intentions. Clearly, this individual was up to no good, and obviously there's a lot more questions as far as what was in his mindset when he clearly wanted to do something violent to the Speaker of the House of the Representatives.
Tom, walk me through who's leading this investigation and how involved are the feds?
The FBI is definitely involved. We just got a statement from them. Their evidence response team, and they're particularly good at this. They're going to comb over the entire scene, try to gather some details. They have the ability to get access to the ownership information on those social media blogs that I referenced before and the blogs that are out on the Internet. They have the ability to get that pretty quickly. They're something that they do quite well with. So they're on top of it from that perspective. That's what they say their role is. As far as the agency that's going to be filing charges, that's going to be the District Attorney's Office in San Francisco. And right now, this is being led by the police department in San Francisco. But of course, depending upon what happens with motive, that's the key question here, Chuck. Whatever happens with that motive, there could be federal charges. If somebody was trying to carry out an attack against a government official, that could potentially change things. So that's something that I'm going to be watching for over the next couple of hours. If we see the FBI take a role or if there are federal charges that are considered, I think that'll tell us a lot from a motive perspective. Just to give you an example, and this is clearly not the case, but had this been a burglary gone wrong, this guy happened to the wrong house, it would still be a local crime. There would be no federal involvement whatsoever. So that's what we're looking for.
Let me ask you this. When members of Congress have death threats against them, Nancy Pelosi being somebody that there's probably quite it happens just like Secret Service deals with death threats all the time with their protectees. Who vets those threats? I ask this because I'm sure there's going to be a dive into finding out, did he make these threats in the past? Was this something that should have been flagged? Is he somebody that should have been taken more seriously? And I get it. In hindsight, it's always easy to take the crazy more seriously than when you do in the moment. So who handles that? Who does these vettings of death threats against major prominent members of Congress like the Speaker of the House?
Right. So the security not only of Congress but of the members of Congress is something that falls squarely on the shoulders of the U.S. Capitol Police. The Sergeant at Arms in Congress is responsible for the physical security, the glass, the locks, the alarms, et cetera, at the Capitol. But when it comes to security, both within the Capitol and outside of the Capitol with the protectees, that's something that squarely falls on the U.S. Capitol Police's shoulders. And they said this morning that they are sending out some of their own members to work with the FBI, to work with local police as part of their threat unit to determine whether or not they have any additional threats. And I think that's going to be an important thing. Was this individual speaking with anybody else? Does anybody else think that it's a good idea to perhaps try to attack a member of Congress's home? As you mentioned, the threats have been wildly on the increase here over the past couple of years. So they're going to be looking at that and also obviously taking a look at, was there anything that we missed here in hopes of not letting anything slip through the cracks again, though we have no indication of that so far.
Ben Collins, and I know you're going to be careful here. Everybody wants to vet the social media footprint, but you've got some indication here, and you've got some expertise on this sort of radicalization that happens on the internet these days. What are you seeing, and what have you learning about this person's footprint?
So I do want to say really quickly that on January 6th, people were yelling, "Where's Nancy?" in the hallways of the Capitol. I don't know if that's a coincidence, but that is something that happened then. There's video of it. We saw it during the January 6th hearings.
That's a fact. Yep.
That is a fact. So that is something that we do know. And also, we do know that Nancy Pelosi in the far-right internet is very widely believed to be somebody basically running this cabal. If you're a Pizzagate person or a QAnon person, they believe that she is at the top of it, along with like Hillary Clinton, because she has lasted many Democratic and Republican administrations so far. She is a lasting feature of public life. So she has taken on a lot of heat. She's sort of the main character, especially now on the far-right internet. They constantly use her for memes. She is even more so than Joe Biden. She is viewed as sort of a central and primary.
Well, Ben,
villain.
we see this on our TV ads, right? Yeah. In some might say in a more traditional way, where she is used as sort of, hey, so-and-so is aligned with Nancy Pelosi. It sounds like what you're saying is on the fringe level world, it's not about being aligned. It's something darker, more sinister.
Oh, yeah. It's if you believe that there is a cabal of Satanists running the country or something, which some QAnon people do, or all QAnon people do, this is you believe that she is at the top of the food chain there, quite literally. So that is part of this issue here, is that there is these threats that people make online. Like a lot of, I understand, a lot of politicians who play into this, people like Donald Trump, think it's a game.
Right.
Think he's trying to like reignite his base or something. People really firmly believe this. And if they really firmly believe somebody's eating kids, or there is some sort of wild pedophile cult or something, some of them are going to take action, and they have in the past.
Ben, this is an unanswerable question, so I apologize for making you try to answer it. But the issue is, how do you, I guess, is if the U.S. Capitol Police came to you and say, how do you know whether a death threat is serious or not in this crazy online fringe world? I mean, that seems to be, that's some of the difficulty here, is which one of what's actionable and what isn't.
It's so hard. And look, we're not mind readers, but I will say that, back in the day, you couldn't make a threat about blowing up an airplane or shooting up a school or something without getting visited by the FBI. That is really not the case right now for a lot of people on the far right internet who, post about this sort of thing constantly, about trying to, about QAnon and about the day of the rope or whatever. So that's the difference. It's incredibly hard. It's a wildly difficult thing to figure out who's serious about the revolution and who is not.
Yeah. No, look, I happen to believe there are 5 internet companies that have more responsibility for what's going on right now in our horrible rhetoric than any member of the media does. It's the amplification issue that seems to be the biggest issue. Ryan Nobles, a lot of members of Congress are reacting. We're all sort of chilled by what Susan Collins said to the New York Times over a month ago, almost foreshadowing this moment. What are you hearing from members of Congress? How concerned are members? And where can the Capitol Police protect them all?
Chuck, that is really the most important question, right? The Capitol Police has said time and time again that they are under an enormous budget crunch right now. They are still really reeling from what happened here on January 6th. They had a number of retirements and Capitol Police officers that just outright quit after January 6th. They've had a difficult time recruiting, and they just don't have a big enough budget that would be required to have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week detail on all 535 members of Congress. It's just impossible. It would be an astronomical sum of money that taxpayers probably aren't willing to foot the bill for. So that's the first challenge. But we're already starting to see these members of Congress react to this. Initially, it was just an outpouring of support for the House Speaker, concern that her husband make a full recovery. But now we're starting to see, especially as these reports come out from Ben and others about this social media history of this particular individual, real concern about what his motives were. There's a statement that I want to read to you from Bill Pascarell, a congressman from New Jersey, and he minces no words about it, Chuck. He says, I condemn the attempted murder. He calls it an attempted murder of Paul Pelosi and pray for his recovery. But let's be direct. Today's violence seems to be the direct product of big lies from many Republicans and Republican propaganda organs about Democrats and American democracy. And so this is just the beginning of this. I have to imagine that over the next 24 to 48 hours, you're going to see more and more Democratic lawmakers come out and say that this isn't in a vacuum. There are members of the Republican Party that have fueled some of this rhetoric, and at the very least are afraid to call it out. Either afraid to call it out because they themselves might be the target of it, or afraid to call it out because it could hurt their electoral chances. And this is going to be a major topic of conversation in the next Congress, Chuck, how to solve this problem. And it's one, especially if we have a divided Congress. Republicans may be controlling one House and Democrats controlling another, that will be very difficult to reconcile.
Anybody that says they're surprised this happened has been living in a hole. We may be shocked by the details, but nobody, not a single person that in our conversation right now, is surprised, is surprised that this happened. Let me bring in Mary McCord. And Mary, you're here because you're an expert on radicalization. This could end up looking like a textbook case, no?
Yeah, and if I may, I'd like to comment on a few of the things already that we've discussed because, I spent 20 years in the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office, 3 years as in national security at DOJ, including as the acting assistant attorney general. And, it's not all the Capitol Police that is responsible for investigating these threats. At the U.S. Attorney's Office, we kept an AUSA, an assistant United States attorney, on threat detail 24/7 around the clock, around the year, and frequently would get referrals of threats to members of Congress, work with the FBI to investigate those threats right away. So Capitol Police will take the first look, but when it seems like, there's a true threat there, a credible threat, that comes right over to the investigators at DOJ, who can then open a grand jury investigation if necessary and obtain subpoenas and to look into all the kinds of things that others have been already mentioning. I'll also mention that I was part of the House 1-6 task force on U.S. Capitol security immediately after the January 6th attack. And one of our recommendations, this was a task force led by General Russell Honore, and one of our recommendations was to substantially expand protection for members of Congress, including in their home districts, at their homes, and in their offices in the districts. And you're right, the price tag is enormous, but the threats, even back when we issued our report in March 2021, the threats were already at 4 times what they had been prior to January 6th, and they continued to rise. But to your actual question, this is the same types of disinformation that have driven other types of political violence, that drove the violence at the Capitol on January 6th, continues nearly 2 years after the election to drive the kind of violence that we saw today. It may be less physical than today, like we're seeing increases in voter intimidation efforts across the country. We've had threats to election officials and election officers consistently since the election in 2020. Still today, it's not like there was just a quick, spike and it dissipated. It's still ongoing. We're seeing efforts to recruit poll workers who deny elections, to challenge people's abilities to vote. And these are all things a little more subtle than this attack on the speaker's husband, but they're political violence all the same.
Yeah, look, I want to put up, this is just a list we put together, and I'm not going to even sit here and claim it's exhaustive, but since May 23rd, let me read you the various incidents of political violence we've had. On May 23rd, a man pled guilty to threatening Dr. Fauci. On June 8th, a man was arrested for threatening to kill Justice Kavanaugh, was stalking him around his house. On July 14th, a man threatened Pramila Jayapal, a congresswoman from outside of Seattle, who was threatening her outside her house. Congressman Lee Zeldin, who's running for governor in New York, was attacked by a man with a knife also in the month of July. Pro-Trump gunmen attacked the FBI offices in Cincinnati on August 11 after Mar-a-Lago. We have a woman charged with making death threats against the Judge Aileen Cannon in that and she was charged in September. And, of course, today, on the same day of this attack, we had a man plead guilty to threatening the life of Congressman Eric Swalwell. Mary, I guess I come back to you in this. We obviously see the rise. The root cause, I don't think we can secure our way out this. The root cause is clearly rhetoric and how it's amplified online. Pure and simple, no?
Oh, I agree. And I would just say, it's not unlike what we've seen foreign terrorist organizations do. So when I was at the Department of Justice in 2014 through 2017, when ISIS declared a caliphate, what did they use? They use internet platforms, social media, private forums and chat rooms to spread disinformation, to recruit, to propagandize, to monetize, to plot, and to plan, right? And domestic extremists do the same thing. The pattern is unmistakable, and that is the medium of choice. And sometimes it's very open and accessible, and very quickly they use private forums and private chat rooms to engage in further spreading of false information, whether it's about the satanic cabal that the Democrats supposedly are running that is, preys on children, or whether it's about false claims of election fraud in 2020. And the thing about it is that extremists across the spectrum are now trafficking in each other's disinformation. So you have conspiracy theorists like QAnon, along with white nationalists, along with accelerationists, right, and anti-government extremists and private unlawful militias, all propagating the same type of disinformation.
Yep. The people that need to answer a lot of questions, first and foremost, are at Facebook, Google, Twitter, TikTok. That's a place I'd certainly like to see get started. Anyway, Tom Winter, Ben Collins, Ryan Nobles, and Mary McCord, thank you all for getting us started. We're going to continue to follow this breaking news. We'll bring you any new developments as we get them. As you know, Paul Pelosi's in surgery right now, and as we get an update on his condition, we will also share that with you. All of us are praying and hope for his speedy recovery. We're going to dive into the danger of extremism in our politics panel next. Plus, we're 11 days out from the midterm elections. Democratic Party's biggest names are hitting the road. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The attack at the home of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has once again thrust into view the rise of threats of violence in our politics, deep divisions with America that have normalized an increasingly hostile rhetoric. As we said at the top of the show, there are forces inside the GOP that have painted the speaker as a political boogeyman. Negative ads featuring Pelosi have been running in congressional races for more than a decade. Here's just a few recent examples.
Nancy Pelosi has big plans for America. But first, she needs allies like liberal Tony Vargas.
And Pelosi are breaking our country. And if Republicans stay home and don't vote, we're letting them.
Pelosi can't make things this bad all on her own. She needs Dan Kildee, Pelosi's right-hand man.
Get ready for the mother of all tax bombs. Pelosi and the president have declared war on working Americans.
Look, obviously that looks much differently today after what we know what happened there. She's joining me now on set, Leigh Ann Caldwell, Washington Post live anchor, co-author of the Daily 202, Democratic strategist Xochitl, and Danielle Pletka, senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I think it was Susan Collins about 6 weeks ago, Leigh Ann, that essentially said, a member of Congress is going to get killed, essentially. And I think, all of this can sound and seem alarmist in the moment until we have an incident like this.
Right, exactly. And members of Congress have actually been warning about this for a long time, especially since January 6th. Before January 6th, there were threats too. Susan Collins went through this after the Kavanaugh incident. And you had the shooting on the baseball field where a Bernie Sanders supposed supporter came and shot Republicans who were practicing. This is something that has been a problem in this country for several years. There has been more resources devoted to security around members of Congress, but funding is still an issue. There's still a shortage of Capitol Police officers. They're having a recruitment issue. And also with this, Nancy Pelosi wasn't there, and so Paul Pelosi was not protected at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting, Danny, and in some ways, we're going to think about this, hey, we need more security and we need more of this, and there's no doubt. We've had harsh rhetoric in our politics for decades. But the one thing we haven't had in our politics for the last decade is what social media does and this amplification. And it's hard not to sit here and, they may look like I'm not going to draw the straight line yet, but I'm drawing dotted lines. It does feel like this is the difference maker and why suddenly there have been so many acting out of these violent scenes.
It's not only in politics, it's in everything. It gives agency to people who have nutty ideas. It gives them a sense of being part of a community that thinks the way they do and validates what they're thinking about doing. We saw this with the shooter in New Zealand, where on Facebook he had a community of people following him. We see this with Kanye West when he goes out and spews anti-Semitic hatred, and bevies of anti-Semites go and cheer him on. This is such a huge problem in our society, and more security, of course. You want people to be protected, but what you really want is for people to stand up against it. And
Xochitl, this is what feels as if that certainly we're not seeing enough people condemn this rhetoric.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that the attack ads on Nancy Pelosi, every midterm election, every recent election, there is an attack ad on Nancy Pelosi, right? And everyone uses her as sort of the boogeyman. This rhetoric has consequences. And what I will say is, when I worked at the DNC, I cannot tell you, every week we had a threat. And there was a bomb outside. Everyone is well aware on January 6th, outside the DNC and RNC, they still haven't caught those people. But the rhetoric has consequences, and we're seeing that here. And it's unfortunate. We might have leaders on both sides call it out, but what's actually going to happen now?
And look, the apocalyptic language that's been adopted, mainstreamed in our politics is not helpful. I'm not trying to sit here and be a language police, but at the end of the day, just 95% of people can weed out what's real and what isn't. But the 5% who can't, it becomes they act out.
Yeah, and this is also when conspiracy theories are alive and well in politics and people's supporters as well, especially when you have political leaders who are also espousing those conspiracy theories. People are having trouble understanding what's the difference between truth and what's not true. And this is just a bad cycle of people going down this tube of trash, really. And you combine that with no one, like you said, no one standing up to put an end to this, to say, no, this has gone too far. We used to see that most recently when John McCain was alive during the 2008 election.
How about after Gabby Giffords, when all the members of Congress said, you know what, we're all going to sit next to each other. We're not going to have the red side and the blue side for the State of the Union. It was symbolic, and we can all but there's none of that.
Oh, yeah, that would never happen. And the next Congress could be more extreme as the one that we've seen. There's no end.
What did the poll that NBC put out this
80% of either side viewed the other party as a threat to the nation.
Right, and that's not that's a bipartisan insanity where, the one person looks at another and thinks, you are going to be the end of the democracy that I know best. Yeah. That's not Republicans or Democrats. That's both. That's crazy.
Well, and by the way, the whole point of why did we invent politics? I always say this. Why was it invented? To resolve disagreements without violence. And now essentially we're reversing this. The whole point of politics is not to get 100% your way, Danny, or your way, Xochitl. Yeah. It's to have a verbal back and forth to figure out, can we come to a reasonable solution that doesn't make us want to pull out a weapon? And that is essentially why we invented this.
I remember a great conversation we had John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, at an event at AEI, a private event. And it was a large number of people, a lot of donors, a lot of important people, a crowd of about 300-400 people. And someone raised their hand and said, how do you deal with Nancy Pelosi every day? And he said...
It wasn't a coffee mug.
That's also true. But he said, what? He said, I talk to Nancy every day, multiple times. She is my friend.
They're like this. Yeah. They were always like this.
But it was such a good reminder that a lot of the rhetoric used to be just on the surface and behind the scenes. But now I think that's over.
You don't see that these days. You don't see sort of those bipartisan
I worry that operatives actually believe the rhetoric they're writing into their campaign spots.
I actually completely agree with you. And they take that on the campaign trail. They talk to voters about it. It's a never-ending cycle, and it's hopefully we learn from this in the new Congress regardless, can do something, but I don't have much hope for that.
So, this is, I don't even want to pretend to know whether this has an impact on the midterms, whether it doesn't on this point. This is, the one thing I keep thinking about is, boy, I wonder if Elon Musk regrets his purchase today. Because, this is, he is suddenly now, he had all these thoughts about free speech. Okay, good luck.
Yeah, this is something that he wanted to take on. He wants the digital town hall to be on Twitter. Yeah, good luck with that. Twitter is something that has devolved into something that is nasty. And that's already with Twitter weeding out the most extreme on both sides of it. But, getting back to these relationships, the Republicans and Democrats, and how it used to just be rhetoric and they could get along behind the scenes. Nancy Pelosi and Kevin McCarthy have not spoken in years.
No, their relationship is truly toxic.
Yes, they have not spoken in years. And so it's not like they are setting a good example at the top either.
No, it is. That's the concern I have, Danny, is that we're now going to get elected leaders that actually believe the other side is the voters believed it, but like you said, the electeds didn't. We're going to have a lot of electeds that believe the other side.
Right, but I would still say they're in the minority. I still believe.
I hope you're right. I think we all do.
I hope I am right. But if they are, then it is the responsibility of people who actually do think that this sort of behavior is appalling. Whether it's Susan Collins, who spoke out, I saw there are a whole series of people on both sides of the aisle who've spoken out. They need to lead.
The elephant in the room is Donald Trump. It just is. he just, whatever it is, I will tell you this. I was never attacked for being Jewish until June 11th, 2015.
Well, and I never felt the attacks about being Mexican until Donald Trump, decided to start talking about how they're racist and attacking that judge, et cetera. What I will say is you talk about the midterms and how this will impact the midterms, and I, again, don't want to go there. What worries me the most, though, is that these midterms aren't going to be decided on Election Day. They're going to be decided days after the election. And that only hurts with the rhetoric, right? You will have conspiracy theorists out there. And I think it's on these leaders to accept the results of the election and try to put their best foot forward regardless. And I'm not sure that that will happen.
We're going to hear from Trump at some point on this. How's he going to handle it?
Yeah, I don't know how he's going to handle it. But on the flip side, I was in Alaska last weekend where Lisa Murkowski told me that she was going to vote for Mary Peltola, a Democrat in Alaska running for the House. The amount of hatred that in response online to the fact that Lisa Murkowski was crossing party lines to support a Democrat was incredible. Thousands and thousands of tweets of people wanting to ban Lisa Murkowski.
Danny, you worked in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which means you put on a lot of codels, bipartisan codels. The second you went across the ocean, everybody in the group was American, right? They weren't Democrat and Republican. And it is amazing to me now how that people are viewing like almost like you're a traitor to the country if you're a member of the other political.
Well, sure. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I was so sorry to see Nancy Pelosi go to Taiwan by herself. You know, even the speaker, who, you know, as you said, rightly, they're not close. Even the speaker said, you know, nobody has the right to treat the Speaker of the House that way, no matter what party they come from. But off she went with only a Democratic delegation. Members play into this. You know, the problem for all of us is, you know, everybody likes to... Donald Trump lowered, I think, a lot of the standards that we live by in Washington. What is depressing about that is not that everybody kind of said, you know, you are an anomaly. Everybody said, hey, wait, you know, that seemed to work pretty well.
It became a permission slip.
Me too. Yeah. Not just Republicans, Democrats as well. You guys talk about being attacked. Believe me too.
No, I know.
It's no fun at all. It's dreadful. But remember Michelle Obama said, you know, when they go low, we'll go high? Yeah. When they go low, we'll go low too.
No, it's true. No, on social media, the only venom that's worse than the left for me is the venom from the right. I mean, it is nasty.
But at least everybody hates you.
I appreciate that. Leigh Ann, Xochitl, and Danny, thank you. Up next, we are live on the campaign trail where President Obama and some other big-name Democrats are doing get out the vote, trying to see if they can turn the tide in some razor-thin races. Just 11 days to go. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. Turning now to the campaign trail in full. We're 11 days out from the big day. Big-name Democrats are now pulling out all the stops, working to fire up their base and get folks to the polls. This isn't about undecided voters. This is about people undecided about voting that everybody is talking to these days on the right and the left. President Biden and Vice President Harris will be speaking tonight at a Democratic Party event in Philadelphia. That is scheduled before the first pitch in the World Series, in case you're wondering. President Obama will be in Atlanta later today, rallying with Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock as Democrats look to motivate African-American voters who live in and around Atlanta. And earlier this afternoon, the Transportation Secretary and pretty much the top Biden surrogate outside of Biden and Harris, Pete Buttigieg, appeared with Mandela Barnes in Madison, a college town where Democrats are looking to run up the score in the face of what appears to be tepid youth turnout so far among the early vote. Buttigieg used his appearance to criticize Barnes's Republican opponent, Senator Ron Johnson.
You got a senator who is pretty far out. We're not talking about what we used to think of as normal Republicans. Not when it comes to somebody like Ron Johnson. We're talking about a fork in the road over what kind of country we're going to be. It used to be plain as day that if nothing else, we could all agree what a democracy was. And part of a democracy is if somebody gets beat in an election, you accept the outcome and you move on.
Shaquille Brewster was at that Buttigieg-Barnes rally. He joins us live from Madison. Ellison Barber is in Atlanta, where President Obama is expected to be. Shaq, let me start with you there in Wisconsin, since your event already took place. Look, I've seen the national numbers indicating youth turnout kind of tepid. That is a recipe for losing in Wisconsin if Democrats, for the Democratic side, if they don't get the Madison turnout up. What did you see on the ground? What are you hearing? And what was the focal point of this event?
Well, the focal point of this event, Chuck, was turnout. Early voting has started in Wisconsin. It's about 400,000 people who have cast a ballot at this point, and they want to get as many people out to the polls. You continue to hear these jokes from candidates on both sides of the aisle that they claim they will have an overwhelming vote, that they'll have a landslide victory, but then they caution and say a landslide in Wisconsin is 1 percentage point. And that is why you're hearing that, and that's why you're seeing so many of these surrogates come to the state of Wisconsin. Earlier this week, we talked about it. Elizabeth Warren, Glenn Youngkin. Today, you have Pete Buttigieg. On the Republican side, you had Rick Scott with Senator Ron Johnson. People know that this will be a turnout game, and we're going into the first weekend of early voting here in the state. This will be a major marker, a major key to if they can bring those voters out, especially in the college towns for Democrats, especially in the Milwaukee area for Democrats, and that's why you're going to see former President Obama in Milwaukee. You know, one thing I did ask, and we talked about this yesterday, I asked Tony Evers, you know, what does he hope to get from Obama's visit? He said turnout. Republicans are saying the same exact thing. Yeah. They want to see voters come out because in this 50-50 state, it's all about who shows up at the end of the day.
Yeah, as I was telling people earlier today, Shaq, I don't think there's going to be a single county that if Ron Johnson or Barnes win, whichever one wins, which counties are red and blue will be exactly the same. It's all about the margins. Anyway, Shaq on the ground for us in Madison, thank you. Let's go south to Georgia, where Ellison Barber is going to be on the beat as President Obama makes his way to Atlanta. He's there to campaign both for Stacey Abrams and Raphael Warnock, but we know what this is about. This is about juice and turnout. What are they literally going to take people to early voting stations tonight?
I mean, they are certainly hoping that his presence here will encourage the Democratic base in particular to show up and vote early, vote Election Day. You can see a little bit of the lines behind me. I mean, there are thousands of people waiting here to get inside to hear former President Obama speak. An advisor to the former president told our colleague Sahil Kapoor that President Obama plans to tell voters at this event tonight that democracy is under threat, talk about the threats that he believes are currently risking democracy, and also talk about economic concerns and make the argument that Democrats are really the ones who are fighting for Georgia voters. But as you said, I mean, this really is coming at a very important time where Democrats, just like we've seen Republicans doing on the campaign trail, are really trying to appeal to their core constituencies and make sure that they are turning out in droves. You look at early voting numbers here in this state, and they are just smashing records. Across all demographics, all regions in Georgia, there's an uptick compared to 2018 early voting numbers, but particularly there's been a significant uptick among voters over the age of 50 and black voters. One group that Obama is hoping to appeal to are young voters. They need to see those numbers out high, and Georgia Democrats, they are really hoping that former President Obama's presence here will help drive those people to the polls and give the Democratic candidates an advantage in really close races.
Ellison, I know you're covering this Senate race so closely. How do the Walker people believe the polls that are showing them surging?
They do. One thing that they will say, and we've seen in their internal voting, is that an outlier here that you have to watch for is the Libertarian candidate. Right now, he's taking 4 to 5% of the vote, and most of it coming from people who would typically be voting for the Republican Party. And that's going to be a factor here. But they do feel like they're in a position where they think they're on the up right now. Chuck.
Fascinating. Ellison Barber. I only ask after we heard from Chuck Schumer on a hot mic. So we had to see. I'm sure the Walker campaign loved hearing that hot mic. That's
and Walker, sure. Walker's people are playing that up. Yes, that's
I imagine
for sure.
They are. Ellison Barber on the ground for us in Georgia. Ellison, thank you. Well, we are in the final countdown. We're going to have special coverage 1 week out from the midterms. We're going to start at 8 p.m. Eastern night. Call it a dry run for election night. Kristen Welker and I are going to give you everything you need to know to be an expert on how to watch election night and election week. So we're going to do this a week in advance, Tuesday night, November 1st, day after Halloween. Be there and enjoy that. We'll be right back with more after a quick break. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, former President Barack Obama is hitting the campaign trail for Democrats tonight in Atlanta, looking to fire up the base ahead of next month's election. Joining me now to get some insight on the entire midterm season and President Obama's return to the trail is former Obama campaign manager and senior advisor David Plouffe. You know, David, it was a different conversation I thought we were going to have today before the Pelosi incident and the attack and the home invasion and what appears to have perhaps been an attempted attack on her. It didn't seem that long ago when Barack Obama and John McCain was denouncing people at a forum in public to sort of make sure the crazy doesn't get all worked up. And in fact, I believe you're the last presidential election, David, where both nominees were above water by November. We didn't demonize and dehumanize the way we do in today's politics. I'm just curious what you're thinking right now.
Well, Chuck, as you know, I mean, politics has been rough and tumble since the formation of this country. But I do think what we're seeing today, is unprecedented. I think there's a lot of hate, obviously, and that can be on both sides. But in terms of, I think, what has been unleashed out there by Donald Trump, by Tucker Carlson, by Breitbart, by Steve Bannon, all of these really agents of hatred. It shouldn't shock any of us, sadly, that there's violence. And I think we're going to have a bunch of close races, is my sense, in this election, that, House districts could be decided by 200, 300, 400 votes. Senate races could be decided by a few thousand. And I think there's going to be a lot of people out there who are going to be told that those elections are rigged. It's not fair. The Democrats are pedophilia pushers, and they hate this country. So yeah, this is really, and you match this with the unprecedented ability for people to carry guns wherever they basically want in a lot of parts of the country. It's very scary.
It is, and I guess the question, I don't know how we put this back into the toothpaste tube, because, and I say this, look, you've had some after your political life, the Silicon Valley community. Do you think these tech companies even have the ability to roll back what they've unleashed with these algorithms?
I think it's hard, Chuck. I mean, I think that it seems that, both bad actors and just humanity generally seem to be ahead of these tech companies. You have, most of the world on these platforms. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it is. But so, yes, I think the pipes are a huge problem. Yep. But let's not forget what's at the top of the funnel here, which is the Tucker Carlsons, the Donald Trumps, the Steve Bannons, just shouting, lying, basically trying to tear this country apart. And listen, are we going to remain a democracy? I think it's very much an open question. If we're a democracy on January 20th, 2025, I think we'll have made it through the dark. But there's no guarantee we will.
David, I was in Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago doing a story about sort of the root, trying to see if that was the first polarized state in the 21st century to me, sort of, and from there, this virus spread. And I think it was Tommy Thompson who said, he goes, part of the problem with this fight between the parties is that nobody's winning by enough. And nobody, when you lose an extraordinarily close race, you don't think you had bad ideas. You think the other side had more money, had this, or maybe you think more nefariously they cheated or whatever, right? Nobody ever accuses somebody of cheating when there's a 30-point win. It's always when it's that half a percentage point. And that, I'm curious, to me, these midterms are going to resolve nothing. Republicans might sweep everything and only narrowly win the actual result by a point or two, right? It just all tips in one direction. And why should anybody look in the mirror to say they're not, they can't win the next time if they just raise another dollar, get another voter out, et cetera?
Yeah, well, I think that's right. I mean, I think that, well, it is interesting, though. The four prior midterm elections have all been wave elections, which is sort of unprecedented in American history. This one looks like it's not going to be a wave election. We'll see. It looks like it's going to be close. But yeah, I think that's right. But think about that. I mean, that defies basically the entire history of the country, which is you respect election results, whether you lose by one vote or you lose by 1 million. And we've lost that.
We have. David Plouffe, like I said, maybe next week we could talk about some strategy, talk about whether President Obama, let me ask you this, is he going to go to Charlotte? To me, that'll tell me a lot about North Carolina Senate. Will we physically see Barack Obama in the state of North Carolina before Election Day?
Yeah, well, I don't have authority over his schedule anymore, so I don't know. But I know he loves North Carolina.
Do you think he should? Do you think he should?
listen, there's only so many places he can go. And ultimately, he doesn't make these decisions. He's guided, obviously, by Senate and House leadership. So,
all right. David Plouffe, as always, sir, thank you. Good to talk with you.
Thanks, Chuck.
Still to come, it's about to be documentary season here at Meet the Press. So what better person to talk about documentaries with than my man, Billy Corben. He'll be here next. Welcome back. In the spring of 2020, Reuters released a shocking story on evangelical leader Jerry Falwell Jr. and his wife Becky, reporting that the couple had carried out an affair together with their business partner Giancarlo Granda for several years. The affair and the fallout are the subject of a new documentary, God Forbid. It's out on Hulu next week. But the incident went beyond just a salacious scandal in the evangelical community. This documentary details how then presidential hopeful Donald Trump and his fixer Michael Cohen were heavily involved in keeping the scandal quiet, knowing Falwell's endorsement could make or break a campaign. Take a look.
Michael Cohen approached me, and Donald Trump is going to run for president, and they want my endorsement. I didn't take it seriously. I'm like, you can't be serious, right? Like, it's probably for ratings. There's no way he's actually running. He's like, no, he really wants to run. And we believe that he can actually win. If Jerry was going to get more involved with politicians, just like how his dad did, he had to ensure that all loose ends were tied.
Well, I'm joined now by the director of this documentary, Billy Corben. And look, Ronald Reagan became president because he got Jerry Falwell Sr. to splinter the evangelical community away from born-again President Jimmy Carter. So this is the son. Billy, what did you find?
Yes, a former B-movie actor, divorced, who signed one of the most permissive abortion laws as governor of California, whose presidential campaign slogan was "Let's Make America Great Again." And Jerry Falwell Sr. helped him right into the White House, as the evangelical voting bloc has every Republican president since. And Jerry Falwell Jr., wanting to follow in his father's footsteps, if not as a religious leader, certainly as a Republican kingmaker. And he did, the first evangelical figure to endorse a twice divorced New York liberal playboy with 5 children from 3 different women, particularly in a primary in which Ted Cruz was running. Clearly the obvious evangelical favorite in that race. And yet Jerry Falwell Jr. kicked that door down and very much paved the way for the presidency of Donald Trump.
What has this done to the evangelical community that's still left at liberty, particularly there in Virginia, but also in general?
Yeah, I think it's peculiar to learn that this cuckold threesome that happened by a Miami Beach pool at the Fontainebleau may have impacted the last 2 presidential elections. But I think they have replaced their religious leaders. As influential as their pastors and figures like Jerry Falwell Sr. and Jr. once were, Donald Trump has taken over that mantle. Mm-hmm. He is the Messiah.
And what was Trump promising this? What was the promise here? What was he going to get in return?
Well, Chuck, you know about Miami. We say that Los Angeles is where you go when you want to be somebody. New York is where you go when you are somebody. And Miami is where you go when you want to be somebody else. I mean, it has just always been a sunny place for shady people. And the Falwells came down here and lived their very best life. OK, wow. President and First Lady of the biggest Christian university in the country. And yet they were down here with the 10 Commandments as like a bucket list, crossing one off after the other. And it was that situation that got them compromised.
I'm curious, what kind of interactions have you had with Jerry Falwell Jr. since making this?
Oh, he's in the corner right now watching.
I know where you're going there. In all seriousness, did you at all are able to corner him or doorstop him?
Well, we sent questions to the attorneys. They declined to comment. But interestingly, back in July, one evening when I posted to Instagram about this forthcoming documentary on Hulu, Becky Falwell started commenting and interacting with other commenters in my Instagram. So maybe she'll pop up there again later.
I think I know where I'm going to, apparently go to the Instagram comments of Billy Corben's Instagram page, and we can find out what the Falwells are up to. Billy, it's good to see you. Congratulations again. If you don't know Billy Corben's IMDb database, you should. He is as good as it gets when it comes to documentaries, especially when they happen in the state of Florida. Thank you, Billy. And, of course, the
Good night and good cuck.
The annual Meet the Press Film Festival is coming up in New York City. Tickets are on sale now. Scan the QR code on screen for more info. And if it's Sunday, it is Meet the Press on your local NBC News station.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.